Welcome to another day in all-wheel drive. I'm in the M3 today. I've been promising it for a while, and today is a day that it comes true. Just ran into a really cool guy named Shane and his WRX. So look for that footage on the channel. Thanks to Shane, really nice guy, great car. You know, when I say all-wheel drive, meeting Shane on this road randomly is exactly what that means. So we just happened to run into each other doing the same thing on the same day, and just took a moment and got to know him and check his car out. Sweet car, and we'll be showing his video soon. But at any rate, we are in the E46 M3 today, and I wanted you guys to just see what it's all about and why this car has such a special place in my heart. You know, I don't typically get emotional about cars. I've had so many cars in my life I can't even count anymore. And I've always told people, you know what, a car is just another means to an end. It's, you know, an opportunity to experience a particular car. It's an opportunity to make money sometimes. It's kind of like a bank account. I mean, if you got a car that's worth money and it will continue to hold its value, you can cash it out. So, you know, for me, in this car and a couple of the others that I've reviewed recently, they have a little bit more of a special affiliation. You know, I tend to gravitate toward them a lot more because they're just fantastic cars in their own right, and what they meant to the automotive industry when they came out was so significant that it's hard to deny how cool and how amazing they are. So this car is no exception. I think if anything, this car kind of epitomizes that. The 993 that I drove recently, another car that really sets the stage for what that means in terms of the enthusiasm for performance cars. But this car, you know, it kind of flies under the radar for me. I think anybody who knows about M3s knows that, you know, after the E30 M3, which was the car that actually broke all the molds, the M3 kind of just leveled off a little bit. Wasn't as hardcore in the E36, in my opinion. I think it's still a great car, but I think until the E46 came about, you really didn't have that same sort of raw nature to the M3 until this car arrived. And, you know, for the period that it ran, it absolutely decimated expectations. I mean, for what you think a performance car will be or should be, particularly in those times, this car kind of walked a fine line of what performance and luxury were, because this car is very accommodating, it's very comfortable. One of the things that I've noticed while I've been in this car today is that I'm absolutely relaxed and in a comfortable position that I could drive this car across the globe if I could get to all the different continents by road and never feel like I need to just switch cars or that I can't journey any further because it's, you know, wearing me out or I'm fatiguing. This thing is absolutely comfortable as heck. And I think that's what makes it such a great car, is that it's kind of like Batman. You know, it's Bruce Wayne, which is capable, fit, confident, well-groomed, and then Batman is all those things plus amplification of technology that makes him, if you will, almost superhuman, because he's got all this gadgetry and all these added things to him that make him able to do things that he wouldn't be able to normally do without the suit. This has more or less a bat suit. It's got a bat button. It's called Sport, and when you hit that button, it just changes a little bit more of the dynamics of the way that the car, you know, the way the induction works and the way the exhaust works, and it just makes it breathe freer. And you can totally feel that. And so I feel like this car is one of those cars that you can totally do every day, life in it, and then when you want to get out and just maybe do a track day, this is also the car to do it in. It's very well planted. It holds the road very nicely. It absorbs the road pretty nicely. It's not very obtrusive in terms of the suspension. You can hit a bump and you don't feel like your back's out of alignment. So it just does everything really well. And so when I'm not driving, I think, yeah, it's a great car. But once I'm in it again, I just kind of find myself amazed at it all over again, because it just does everything really well. BMW did a phenomenal job with this car, and I think this is going to be one of the cars that, you know, probably 10 more years down the road, people are really going to be looking to kind of get a hold of, that's in good condition. And that's the key. Getting one of these in great condition is not a bad investment. Even if you get one that needs work, These cars are fairly easy to work on. The parts are fairly easy to come by. There are tons of mechanics that will do the work on it and get it right again. Rebuild the engine, rebuild your tranny, and pretty much that's all you need to do. These cars are rock solid from the mechanical standpoint. Electrics, I've never noticed any issues with them. You know, it seems to be working perfectly. Cooling wise, this car was a little better than the E46, which had some cooling issues. I don't know if many of you are familiar with that car, but you know, you tended to have overheating in those cars, and I think a lot of those kinks that happened in the E36 have been worked out to the point where this car it's pretty much flawless in those respects. The E36 is going to come back. I've started to see the prices of those cars start to spike up. Once upon a time you could get one under 10. Now it looks like 12 to 15 is a norm, and some cars I've seen for 25. Just depends on the condition, but those cars, if you can get one sorted out, another car that's really nice and desirable. The only thing with those cars is that in the US we got the detune model. It didn't have the individual throttle bodies, and I think it only put out about 240 something horsepower in the US, whereas the car in Europe put out like 280 to 3. So you know, it's a little bit more inspiring in the foreign market, but that car was still a great car. So like I said, if you can get one that's sorted out, not a bad investment. But since today we're here about the E46, we're going to stick to the E46. So let's get it rolling. All-wheel drive. And one of the things that I've really just found myself just taken by is how smooth everything is. I mean, the transmission is great. I mean, the throws are solid. They're not short, but they're not incredibly long either. And the stick is just right so that you reach it without having to apply too much effort. Particularly going in the forward gears in the H. So first, third, fifth. But as I was saying, it's so planted. I mean, I'm able to go around corners really confidently in this thing. And it just holds. I mean, the tires are not as wide as the Porsche, the 997. But you know what? This thing has got really good balance, weight distribution wise. I mean, with the engine being in the front, you always worry about understeer. But I think this thing is set up so well that it handles the corners without understeer very confidently. Now braking, obviously that's going to be another issue. If you're going into let's say a really deep corner or off camber corner and you got to brake in the middle of it, which is not ideal. You should basically get yourself set up for the corner before you get into it. But if you find yourself in one of those sticky situations, you might get a little bit of it there, but it'll be controllable. But it'll be enough that you can actually work your way out of it. It's just such a fantastic car. From the design of it, interior wise, exterior wise, it all complements each other. And for a driver, it complements the driver because of the way it's built around you. One of the things I really like about this particular generation of the 3 Series is the way that they designed the dash. I don't know if many of you have seen the evolution of the dashboard layout in the BMWs, particularly from 2006 on. In 2006, the 4-door E90 arrived, and it was more of a continual just piece all the way across with no variations in it, you know, in the surface. Whereas this car, it's got a swooping area for the passenger, and then everything sort of shifts and angles towards the driver. So it's a little bit more driver-centric in that way. From a design standpoint, it just kind of creates that unique feeling for the driver that I'm sitting in a cockpit design around me. Whereas in the newer cars, it's almost like it's just, here you go, everybody's sitting at the same sort of position, if you will. It's not as directed towards the driver as, say, this is. But whatever, that's just a preference thing. But I just feel like when a car is set up that way, you're just more in a focused state of mind, and you're more, I'll say, suited to drive the car the way it was intended to drive or be driven because of the way you're positioned. So that's important to me, and this car definitely has that characteristic down. The engine in this car, inline 6, 3.2 liter, puts out 333 horsepower, roughly 262 pound-feet of torque. So it has really good low and mid-range torque. But like typical inline engines, like say the Honda 4-cylinder VTEC engines, the more you rev them, the more you get out of them. This car redlines at 8,000 RPMs. So when you're up about 4,000, it just wakes up and it just keeps pulling all the way up. I typically don't redline cars like I used to, thinking that if you squeeze, you're going to continue to get more and more and more. Well, cars have breaking points, and not to imply it's going to break, but it's like the car doesn't have any more. The engine doesn't have any more to give you once it hits those peak numbers. If you look at a spec sheet, you'll see something like 333 horsepower at 4,800 RPM, and 262 pound-feet of torque at, I don't know, 5,000 RPMs. I'm just using examples here. So what those numbers mean when you look at them, they kind of seem random. It's like, why would the torque be peaked differently than the horsepower? Well, horsepower can continue to come on as the engine revs, whereas torque is going to have a shorter life, if you will. So those numbers probably were inverse, but my point is that there are different points in your RPM rev range that you'll get the most of each of those features. So when you've reached the max based on those specs, it's good to shift into a gear that's going to continue to carry that out. So if you go up a gear and then you get back to that 5,000 or 48 or whatever that number is per the specs, then the car will continue to accelerate and give you that, that non-stop force that you were feeling before you reach redline. But this thing just does so well no matter how you drive it. I mean, I'm only rolling about 45 miles per hour through this section, and I mean, that's one of the things that I always find entertaining about cars, is how you can drive it at just normal pace. And a true testament to what a performance car is when you do drive it at a normal pace through a road like this with all these curves, and changes altitude-wise and degrees, and you're staying in one gear, rolling at a certain speed, and the car just floats through it like a knife through butter. I can't think of a better comparison, to be honest with you. It just does a great job. And it's just as fun to drive this way as it is fast. Of course, fast is more fun, but when you can't go fast, it's nice to know you got a car that still entertains you, even when you're not driving at warp speed. And believe it or not, I'm in 5th gear, going through all these changes in the road. So I've got a lot of corners, I got some inclines and some declines, and the altitude varies. It's left, it's right, it goes into deep S's and hairpins, and the car just, it's almost like if the car could talk, it would tell me, wake me up when you're ready for me to impress you. And I'm thinking, I'm already impressed, but I get it. It's got so much more to offer that doing this seems like child's play. Now I'm thinking right now about when I drove the 993. That's it's a much older car, and it was a coupe. This is a convertible, and I've got way less noise going on. That car had a lot of squeaking because of the materials and the plastics and the leathers. It was so old. And you could hear every time I was moving, it was just like a... This car I hear very little, to be honest. BMW's always had phenomenal build quality. There's no denying that. It's just got great mid-range. I mean, that's the thing I've always liked about BMW engines. That inline 6 is my favorite engine, and I'll tell you why. They're able to get as much power out of it as you need to be completely off the freaking wall. They can make an inline 6 engine drive in such a way that you're like, this thing is nuts. This car, I've never pushed it close to the limits. I don't even know what the limits are. But anyway, what I was saying about the engines, they just know how to do so much with that inline engine. And it's kind of like the Porsche philosophy with that Boxer 6. You know, it's just an engine that they can stretch like a rubber band and continue to get more out of it. Now at some point you kind of max out, right? Because then you start to compromise the efficiency of the car. Then you have to go into forced induction, which they both have done, Porsche and BMW respectively. But I remember the first time I drove a 3 Series when I was in college, and it had the inline 6 engine, and that was a 325. And I remember just how impressed I was with how it would come out of second gear or go into second gear, and you would just have this mid-range grunt that would just pull this thing off in such a way that you couldn't help be impressed with it. The car itself wasn't impressive because it was just old. Back in the 80s, they weren't luxurious. You know, in the 80s, Cadillacs were luxurious. But this thing was just, you know, it was just well built. And I remember, you know, hitting second gear and then dumping the clutch a little and just getting the rear wheels to come loose. And I thought, man, this is freaking sweet. And ever since then, the inline 6 from BMW has just been one of my all-time favorite engines, and rightly so. They just do a great job with this thing, and so they were able to put it in so many cars. There was a period where anything M had that engine, and you know, you just couldn't beat it. The other reason I really like the inline is because it's completely easy to work on. The V8s, I mean, I like the V8s, but V8s can be a headache when you really need to get a lot done to it, and of course it's more expensive. These engines, I think, you know, they lasted longer. You didn't get a lot of the same issues that would arise in a V8. I think it was just a better choice, and seeing as how BMW was able to conjure up the performance out of this thing that they did, it makes it an easy argument for me that this would be the engine that I'd probably put in any M car that I would build myself. You know, I mean, would I want an M5 with a V8? Well, heck yeah, I would. The V10 even. But I wouldn't be upset with this engine in it, because this engine just does everything well. But this is the kind of car you would want to take to a track, and you could just go all day long with it. So in terms of mods on the car, I really haven't done anything. I mean, it's pretty much stock. All the equipment that's here is the equipment that came with the car. In terms of the engine, the only thing that's changed is this. And this is the silicone sleeve for the air intake. So it's got a K&N air filter in the stock box. and then I put the sleeve on it. I got it from a place called Bullet Performance. They specialize in everything BMW and have worked on all my BMWs. Great guys. Recommended this, and it just basically allows the air to flow smoother into the throttle bodies. You don't notice it necessarily as you're accelerating or as you drive the car, but it does give it just a easier flow into the throttle body. So that's pretty much all I've done. No exhaust, no changes to the clutch. When I asked the guys, what sort of things could you do to the car if you wanted more power, if you know anything about the M3, there was a model out in Europe called the CSL, and the CSL basically was a completely lightweight car, and it did not have the same components. So they took all the weight out of the back. So in the trunk they didn't have a ton of weight. In the interior, the glass was lighter, thinner. It didn't have a back seat. So everything was just light, carbon, this and that, the hood, I believe, the fenders, and then the engine actually put out an additional, I want to say 17 horsepower, 17 or 18 horsepower. So it was about 351 horsepower out of that particular model. And trying to get to that in this car, I was told, it's almost impossible. This engine is pretty much peaked out from the normal aspiration mode. If you want more power, you're going to do some serious tuning to things like heads and that kind of stuff, which isn't worth it. And then I don't want to do superchargers. I don't want to do turbos. I like the car as it is, so I'll keep the car as it is for the most part. In terms of trunk space, it is a convertible sports coupe, so it's not going to be a ton of space. I don't expect it to be. I don't think anyone else does. One of the things that happens with this convertible, you've got this piece here, which is where the top sort of sits as it goes down. So you've got this element that allows you to adjust this piece, so you can drop it down, and it just creates more room as you need room. This diagram kind of shows you, what you can accomplish when the top's up. Get way more in than when the top's down. It is what it is. But this feature, basically you pull it, that goes up, just gives you a little bit more space back here. So if you need something, if you have something that's kind of tall, it gives you just that little extra space because the top is up. You can't do this when the top's up, obviously, but it is a good feature to have. But if you're going to drop the top, you have to make sure you remember to bring this back down, just so it has room to fully collapse. So this box here, it's a pretty good sized box. It's roughly 2 feet tall, and I can literally get that completely into the car. So compared to me standing to it, you see how high it comes up. Pretty wide, about as wide as I am. It's not a bad thing. I don't eat a lot of fat foods, if you're thinking I'm a fat stuff. But at any rate, this will completely fit in the trunk, and that's with this little feature in its normal position. All this is just a little compartment. It's not very big, but when it's up, it folds up and just makes this that much taller. So you get a few more inches that way. So if you've got suitcases or whatnot that are going to be a little taller than this, then you can accommodate that. You could probably get a couple of carry-ons and a backpack. You could probably get a full-size suitcase in here, and maybe a carry-on and a backpack, but not much else. So if you got a lot of luggage, it's probably not ideal. Some compartments on the side, little pocket over here, little tray here, the DVD center there. Over on this side you'll have your battery. I'm not going to take that out because it's a pain in the ass to put back in. And if you're lucky, when you get one of these, you'll have your complete toolkit. Bada boom, bada bing. Not bad. So it's pretty well thought out. So the top operates with a one button feature. Essentially you hold the button down and it completely lets the top down, drops the windows accordingly, and then conceals the top once the cycle is complete, and then you're off. You do have to be still in the car. It is a little older, so unlike a lot of the newer cars, you can do it while the car is moving. It's not more the ideal situation, but some cars do have that ability. But you do have to come to a stop in this car to do so. But it is a pretty simple effort. You push the button and you're off. So as you can see, it's a pretty slow and long process, and
with all the things that have to take place for the top to go down, I kind of understand why you don't want to be moving. I mean, with that rear cover flapping up in the air, I could see how that could easily break and come off the car. So it makes perfect sense. It takes a while for it to happen, but when it's done, the car looks great. It's a beautiful car with the top down as well as with the top up.
Well guys, that pretty much concludes this episode of All Wheel Drive. I hope you've enjoyed the video. It's been a long time coming, and I've thoroughly enjoyed driving this car again. Like I said earlier, every time I get in this car, I'm just like, wow, what a great piece of automotive machinery. So anyway, be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. If you already have, be sure to like and also share and just get the word out. We got much more to come, and hopefully we'll have a lot more of the on the spots with enthusiasts that we just happen to meet as we're driving. And then we've got some other things lined up with other enthusiasts that we know already. So much more to come. So stay tuned, subscribe, share, like. All Wheel Drive. Peace out.